Chapter 325. This man is the nephew of Mayor Kirk. I heard that Mayor Kirk is recently applying for funding from the state to turn Winthrop into a small tourist spot, and this guy's father is the person in charge of tourism in the state government. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Shenty Clive came to Jiang Hai's side and whispered. Hearing this, Jiang Hai suddenly realized that this guy dared to be so arrogant here for this reason. According to Jiang Hai's understanding, if it wasn't related to their own interests, this guy dared to drive fast on the road in front of the school gate, endangering the lives of their children. Those fishermen, workers, and rough men would not let this guy go. They would have beaten him up long ago. Who cares who this guy's father is? Not to mention that this guy's father is just a leader in charge of tourism in the state. Even if his father is the governor, they would probably beat him up. In the United States, it has always been said that all people are equal. Their honor and status are not appointed by the people above, but by the people. If such a scandal is exposed, not to mention him, even his father will have to leave immediately. In the United States, the public opinion of dozens of people is already a very important thing. If hundreds of people are involved, even the state government can't suppress it. They need to use the power of the United States Congress. This is what it means to disperse power into the hands of the people. But the reason why he is so arrogant now is mainly because of his father. Winthrop is located on the edge of Boston's metropolitan area. In fact, this place is no longer Boston's territory. Since more than 100 years ago when people settled here, this place has actually been a major fishing development area. However, there will be a day when all the fish will be caught. Now, the fish resources in Boston Bay are gradually drying up. Coupled with the impact of large-scale ocean fisheries, although the local fishing industry here is not like Newfoundland, one of the 4 major fisheries in Canada, where there is no fish to catch, the price of fish cannot be sold. But the cost of living is gradually increasing, and dollars are becoming less and less valuable. This is also an inevitable reason. Therefore, if Winthrop wanted to develop and let the residents of the town live a better life, it needed to develop a side business. Tourism was one of the best choices. This method could attract a large number of foreign tourists. Not only could it make the town famous, but it could also allow the town's residents to do some small businesses. Most of the children who came to Winthrop Elementary School came from poor families. It was precisely because of this that they hoped to do well in the tourism industry so that they could earn more money. That was why he allowed this guy to be so arrogant here. Otherwise, he would have been beaten away long ago. As for Shenty Clive, he was invited by the mayor to be his brother's tour guide last week. It was also at that time that this guy had taken a liking to her. He had already been pestering her for a week. You dare to hit me, you actually dare to hit me, I'm telling you, you're dead. Clutching his lower back, the man slowly climbed out of the car. Seeing his beloved car in such a state, he couldn't help but feel angry. Did I hit you? What evidence do you have to say that I hit you? You can eat whatever you want, but you can't say whatever you want. Which eye of mine saw me hit you? Do you have any evidence? You clearly sat in the car yourself. With his arms crossed, Jiang Hai looked at this guy and said with a look of contempt. This guy has angered everyone, how dare he yell here? Do you think these people are blind? They all saw it. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the man here roared loudly. Originally, he was hoping that 1 or 2 people would come out, but after waiting for a long time, there was no sound at all. When he looked over, he found that everyone was looking at him funny, but they didn't speak. You unruly people. There is a camera here, there is a video here. Looking at the silent crowd, the guy pointed to the camera at the school gate and shouted loudly. Are you sure you want to see it? You should know that you came up first and you even exceeded the speed limit. If I remember correctly, you also said that you deliberately exceeded the speed limit, and the purpose was to kill people. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai couldn't help but laugh and said indifferently. What nonsense are you talking about? Looking at Jiang Hai's indifferent appearance, this guy couldn't help but take a step forward. But then he remembered Jiang Hai's fighting strength and abruptly stopped his step. Originally he was about to spit out a curse, but at this time he changed his expression. Although he was still trying to put up a strong front, anyone with a discerning eye could see that he was terrified. I can prove it, he really said that he wanted to kill people. At this time the old security guard Uncle Kyle, who had been staying behind Jiang Hai, walked out and said with a face that deserved a beating. This old security guard was the old man who pulled Jiang Hai to brag. At this time the old man naturally didn't like this guy named Kirk, so he stood up for Jiang Hai and said, You are ruthless. Knowing that he was not welcomed here, this Kirk had no other choice but to swallow his pride. After all, a wise man knows better than to fight when the odds are against him. Now he can't beat Jiang Hai. In the end he cursed secretly. He didn't pick up the bouquet on the ground and went directly back to his sports car. Although his Ferrari was not the best, it was still very expensive. It was much more expensive than the average Mercedes-Benz and BMW. Naturally, its quality was also very good. After getting in, he started the engine. It could still be driven, so he left quickly. Looking at his back after he left, Jiang Hai couldn't help but curl his lips, but at the same time he remembered what Shenty Clive had just said. The town was going to be developed, and he had now regarded this town as his home. If the town was going to be developed, then Jiang Hai could also contribute, but in the end he still had to go to the mayor's house to ask. "Sandy, do you know the address of Mayor Wallace's house?" Looking at Shenty Clive, who showed a trace of worry on her face, Jiang Hai asked her. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, although Sandy didn't know what Jiang Hai wanted to do, she guessed that Jiang Hai might have beaten this guy and felt that the development of the town might be hindered, so he wanted to talk to the mayor. "I know, but it's okay. Mayor Wallace is famous for being a good mayor. He won't blame you for this." Looking at Jiang Hai, Shenty Clive smiled and said seriously, "I know, I have something else to talk to him about. Let's go eat first. After eating you can take me to the mayor's house." Jiang Hai smiled and said to Shenty Clive, then took her to his shield. Under everyone's envious eyes, Jiang Hai left with Shenty Clive. Some of these people were envious of Jiang Hai's car, and some were envious of Jiang Hai being so close to Shenty Clive. After all, this most beautiful flower was a goddess in these people's eyes. Of course, some women were envious of Shenty Clive, who could climb up a big tree like Jiang Hai. But at this time, the two didn't think much about it. After all, the relationship between the two was still a bit hazy. About 10 minutes later, Jiang Hai arrived outside a Western restaurant under the guidance of Shenty Clive. After parking the car, the two walked into the Western restaurant and had a romantic dinner, but still somewhat embarrassing. Jiang Hai really didn't care about other people's gazes. Generally speaking, eating Western food was rarely enough to fill one's stomach. After all, it took a long time for the dishes to be served and the food was small. However, Jiang Hai was an exception. Because he couldn't fill his stomach, he would spend money until he was full. Of course, this way of eating would attract other people's attention, but for Jiang Hai, he didn't care about it. Whether he was full or not was actually the most important thing. Fortunately, Shenty Clive already knew about Jiang Hai's habits, so they didn't care about it. After the two were full, they went to the supermarket in town and bought a bottle of red wine as a gift. Then they went to Mayor Wallace's house. Mayor Wallace lived in the town. It was only about a 5-minute drive from the town hall. Of course, it was such a short distance. Usually, Mayor Wallace wouldn't drive to work. He basically walked. The old people in Winthrop were all familiar with his address because they had more or less been there before. When Jiang Hai's car stopped in front of Mayor Wallace's house, the old man happened to come out to throw out the trash. When he saw Jiang Hai's car, he was stunned. It wasn't easy to mistake this car. Not to mention the license plate, this was the only one in town. "Jiang, oh, and Sandy, what can I do for you?" Seeing Jiang Hai and Shenty Clive get out of the car, Mayor Wallace wiped his hands with his pajamas. After all, he had just thrown out the trash. Although it wasn't dirty, he didn't know what the other party was thinking. Therefore, it was more polite to wipe his hands before shaking hands. "Oh, Uncle Kirk, don't you know what happened just now?" Hearing Mayor Wallace's words, Shenty Clive asked with some surprise. "It has been more than 2 hours since the incident at the school gate. Mayor Wallace didn't receive any news? After that guy was beaten, didn't he come to his uncle to yell?" Hearing Shenty Clive's words, Mayor Wallace also said with a smile, "Ah, it's about the conflict between Jiang and Hewlett. I know. Just now that guy ran over and yelled at me, but I beat him up." Listening to his words, he really didn't seem angry, which made Jiang Hai and Sandy speechless. "If this is the case, then you should go back quickly. Jiang did the right thing. I have nothing to be dissatisfied with. If I knew what that guy had done these days, not to mention Jiang Hai, I would beat him up. It's too shameful." With a wave of his hand, Mayor Wallace said indifferently. Although he wanted to develop Winthrop, he didn't want to sell his soul. "This is one thing, and I want to talk to you about the tourist spots." Hearing Mayor Wallace's words, Jiang Hai chuckled. With his understanding of Mayor Wallace, although family is important, it is not to the extent that he would protect them in order to protect his family. Now what Mayor Wallace said is what Jiang Hai wants to hear the most, and it is also someone who is worthy of his cooperation. "Oh, then come in." Hearing Jiang Hai talking about the tourist spots, not only Mayor Wallace but also Shenty Clive was stunned. She originally thought that Jiang Hai came to talk about his conflict with that guy, but she didn't expect there to be other things. Mayor Wallace was also a little surprised when he heard Jiang Hai's words. Although he knew that Jiang Hai was rich, he didn't know how much money Jiang Hai had. And judging from Jiang Hai's usual behavior, he didn't seem to be very interested in integrating into this town and this group. Now that Jiang Hai said that he wanted to talk to him about the tourist spots, he was also a little surprised. But anyway, Jiang Hai was also a rich man, a big taxpayer in the town. If he didn't say it, it didn't matter. But if he said it, he still had to listen. So Mayor Wallace signaled to Jiang Hai and Shtuani Clive. Then they walked into Mayor Wallace's house. When they opened the door, Jiang Hai saw an old woman sitting on the sofa watching TV. Chapter 326. Can you tell me in detail about the plan for our town? In the study of Mayor Wallace, Jiang Hai looked at the respectable old man in front of him and said seriously. This was the first time that Shtuani Clive had seen Jiang Hai so serious since she met him. For a moment, she really looked like a girlfriend, sitting beside Jiang Hai without saying a word. The town's plan is very simple. As you know, our town doesn't develop industry, and we don't plan to sell land and let those foreign factories destroy our environment. But the environment is good, but the living standards of the residents really can't improve. So I'm thinking about how to let the residents of the town get more income without destroying here. After taking another sip of coffee, Mayor Wallace spoke slowly. As the highest person in charge of the town, he thought that he had an obligation to think about the residents of the town. According to Mayor Wallace's words, Jiang Hai could easily understand his thoughts. In Mayor Wallace's view, the residents wanted to make money, so cutting back was definitely not possible. Americans also didn't know how to cut back. With their spending style, it was good enough that they didn't spend in advance. It was impossible to ask them to save money on clothing, food, housing, and transportation. If cutting back on income was not possible, then they could only increase their income. Originally, the main way of making money in the town was to sell some small things, open some small supermarkets, small restaurants, and so on. Most people mainly made money in two ways. One was the fishermen. After all, they lived by the sea. Some of these fishermen joined the ocean fishing companies in Boston, and some had their own boats. Usually they would go around the high seas and catch some fish. The fishermen's income was originally very good. But in recent years there were fewer and fewer fish. Although there was a fishing moratorium, the number of fish was inevitably decreasing. This and the fishermen's income were linked in a straight line. More and more people changed careers or went to Boston to make a living. If this continued, Winthrop might decline like Newfoundland before long. After all, without people, how could there be any development? Mayor Wallace's heart ached when he saw this scene. Therefore, he had been thinking of ways to make the town's residents live better all these years. They tried to raise their own fish fry, but the cost was too high and the profits were very thin. Coupled with the indiscriminate catching of others, their plan went bankrupt not long after. Later they also tried to recruit some people to build a building. Of course, it couldn't be a factory, but to be honest, although Winthrop wasn't far from Boston, it wasn't far. But why did she come to Winthrop instead of staying in Boston? Massachusetts was not California. Not every piece of land was valuable, so the plan went bankrupt before it could be implemented. Over the years, Mayor Wallace had tried many ways. Finally, he set his sights on the tourism industry. Of course, rather than saying that he was targeting the tourism industry, it was more accurate to say that the Massachusetts government was targeting the tourism industry. In fact, the current situation in Winthrop did not represent the state of Massachusetts, but the state's finances were not very good. At least, they wanted to make some extra money. That was why they focused on the tourism industry, but not the domestic tourism development in the United States. For Americans, there was nothing fun in Boston. If they wanted to have fun, the most fun place would be California. Airfares in the United States were much cheaper than expected, especially airfares to the metropolises. They could even be bought for a few $dozen when it was cheap. For Americans, it would be great to go there. There was Hollywood, Las Vegas, and if they wanted to see the cutting-edge industries, there was Silicon Valley. If they wanted to have fun, there were beaches. Why should they come to Boston? Even if they did not go to Los Angeles, they could go to places with sunshine, beaches, bikinis, or Miami. It was spring all year round. It was close to Orlando, the world's largest Disneyland, and it was cheaper. If you wanted to look for a pasture, you could go to Montana. The sky there was bluer and the grasslands were greener. You could also go to Texas. That was the home of cowboys. You couldn't have water, grass, or mountains. Every tourist destination had to have a highlight. The United States had almost no history to speak of. Under such circumstances, Massachusetts really did not have any bright spots. It was rare to hear people say that they ended up in Boston. At least, this was the case in the United States. If they wanted to go to a big city, they could go to New York. Boston's attraction was not good. Even if Winthrop wanted to develop the tourism industry, their target was not the tourists in the United States. Their target was actually foreign tourists. European and Asian tourists were their main targets. Especially Asian tourists. For these tourists, they also have sunshine and beaches in their countries. But Boston, known as the best university in the United States, was still very attractive to them. It was precisely because of this that the Massachusetts government decided to develop this area. Through some domestic travel agencies, they would communicate with people from distant Asia who wanted to come here to play. They would conduct some activities to quickly apply for visas, or limited discounted development to attract more tourists here. It was precisely because of this news that Mayor Wallace went to find his brother. His brother was a middle-level leader in the Tourism Bureau. He was in charge of tourism. How could there not be a lucrative position? Therefore, Mayor Wallace specially invited them to come over and let them see if Winthrop had any hope of being integrated into Boston's tourism development. He hoped that they could help. It was precisely because of this that the guy named Hewlett was interested in Clive's plot. Hearing this, Jiang Hai also understood Mayor Wallace's intention. You mean you want to be integrated into Boston's development plan? After thinking about it, Jiang Hai knocked on the table and asked. Yeah, but it doesn't seem possible now. Mayor Wallace nodded first, then shook his head. Is it because of me? Looking at him nodding and shaking his head, Jiang Hai asked with some doubts. No, it has nothing to do with you. In fact, I should have figured it out a long time ago. As I said just now, there are bright spots. We really don't have any bright spots here. Boston itself is one of the oldest cities in the United States. It has some historical frontiers. In addition, there are many teams there which can attract sports. Cambridge and Newton have universities which are also bright spots. Chelsea is a rich residential area, Quincy has a big market, and they are all good places to spend money. But here's Sai. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Mayor Wallace immediately shook his head and then explained. The biggest feature of Winthrop is that it has a sea, but Boston also has one. There is a harbor and a free ship museum there. Unlike here, there is nothing. It is just a small broken dock. What is there to see? No matter where it is, if you want to attract people to come and play, you must have something special. But where does Winthrop come from? Something special. If there is no special feature, we can build it. Looking at the somewhat decadent Mayor Wallace in front of him, Jiang Hai chuckled. Build it? Hearing Jiang Hai's understatement, Mayor Wallace couldn't help but wonder. How can it be built? In this world, any problem that can be solved with money is not a problem. Our dock is small and can be expanded. Our streets are small and can also be expanded. There are no traditional features, but it doesn't mean that we can't create our own. First of all, they live by the sea. They can build a row of small villas and hotels by the sea, charge a certain fee and rent them to guests who come to play. Our sea here is much cleaner than Boston's. It is a natural good bathing place. Hearing Mayor Wallace's words, the corners of Jiang Hai's mouth unconsciously opened. These Americans sometimes like to drill holes in their mouths. Winthrop is nothing special in their eyes, but in Jiang Hai's eyes, there are bright spots everywhere. Hearing Jiang Hai mention the first man-made feature, Mayor Wallace's eyes lit up. Looking at his appearance, Jiang Hai didn't stop but continued, at the same time, we can also build a pier and get more cruise ships and the like. Chapter 331. These are. When they walked in, the four pets who were still playing around, fixed their gazes on the two women almost instantly. Dai Fong was fine, and the snow squirrel, who was originally very cute, was also very cute when it tilted its head and looked at them. However, Chio, Lil Yellow and Lil White, who had already matured, were not so friendly. Goldie's wolf-like eyes stared at them indifferently, causing goosebumps to appear all over their bodies. Although Xiaobai did not have wolf-like eyes, its huge body looked very intimidating just by standing there. As for Chio, it was like a wild beast. The way it looked at the two ladies made it seem like it was treating them as food. Feeling the gazes of these beasts and birds of prey, the two of them could not help but stop in their tracks. Don't scare the guests. Don't worry, these are my pets. They won't take the initiative to attack people. Seeing that the two girls seemed to be very scared, Jiang Hai also kicked these guys. Under Jiang Hai's foot, these guys changed very quickly. Goldie was used to being cold, so it just glanced at them and turned to leave. Xiaobai, Dai Fong and Chirpy were much more despicable. The three little guys skipped in front of the two girls and sniffed with their noses. However, other than Dai Fong, the two girls had no immunity to these things. Okay, go play by yourself. Seeing that the two of them were so scared that they did not dare to move, Jiang Hai put down his luggage and walked over. After driving these guys away, he took the two of them upstairs. In the past, I only heard that those rich people raised ferocious beasts. I didn't quite believe it, but now it seems that I was too naive. Behind Jiang Hai, Feng Yunshan said with a smile. In the past, there were a lot of news about this kind of thing, but they just read it with a joking attitude. Now that they saw it, they were also a little scared. Actually, they are not ferocious beasts. The first one to leave is Goldie, a Tibetan Mastiff. The black one is Xiao Bai, a Caucasian dog. They are all pet dogs. Dai Feng is a snow squirrel. I picked it up in the forest of this manor. As for Chirpy, it is indeed a bird of prey. It is the national bird of the United States, the bald eagle, but it is not an adult yet. Hearing Feng Yunshan's words, Jiang Hai also explained with a smile. Although they knew that those two guys were dogs, Feng Yunshan and Ai Xiaoxi still felt a little scared. They followed Jiang Hai all the way to the second floor and breathed a sigh of relief, but before they could completely relax, they saw a door not far from them open, and the figures of Delina and Marian also emerged from there. Hey Jiang Hai, you are back. Looking at Jiang Hai and the two women, the two girls were a little surprised. Just now, Jiang Hai did tell them that he was going to pick someone up, but he didn't say that he was going to pick up women. Oh, you are back. She seemed to have forgotten about time and everything else. She just stood there and watched the most primitive battle inside. After about half an hour, Feng Yunshan's voice suddenly became high-pitched for a while, and then completely softened. Jiang Hai also trembled and gradually let go of his hand. However, although he had reached his limit, Jiang Hai didn't seem to be satisfied. His vitals were still placed on Feng Yunshan's vitals. I can't, you bad guy, bad thing, too powerful. Lying on top of Jiang Hai, Feng Yunshan said to Jiang Hai in a tired voice. To be honest, after tasting Jiang Hai, it was difficult for her to have any interest in other men. Then relax, go to sleep. Gently touching Feng Yunshan's hair, Jiang Hai also said slowly. Seeing that the battle inside was over, Ai Xiaoxi looked like she had just been fished out of the water. She supported her already weak body and wanted to go back. Now that her thoughts have returned to her mind, if she was seen by the people inside now, it would be embarrassing, so she was ready to leave. But just when she turned around, she suddenly found that there was someone else beside her. The feeling of a guilty conscience made her scream in an instant, and at the same time she also saw the appearance of the person who came. The person who came was none other than Jiang Hai's two daughters, Daliana and Marian. When the two girls saw Ai Xiaoxi screaming at this time, they couldn't help but glare at her and then quickly left. Because their room was not far from Jiang Hai's and they also left the door open, the two girls quickly went back in. Ai Xiaoxi was still in a state of shock. At this time, Jiang Hai, who also heard the scream in the room, couldn't help but turn over subconsciously and sit up from the bed. He also officially separated from Feng Yunshan. With a soft snort from Feng Yunshan, the two officially separated. But after the separation, the funds that Jiang Hai injected into Feng Yunshan's body just now had some impulse to rush out by gravity. This made Feng Yunshan cover the circulation channel all of a sudden and look at the door with some dissatisfaction. She wanted to see who was so careless. Jiang Hai came to the door in 2 or 3 steps and opened the door all of a sudden. With a bright light in front of her, Ai Xiaoxi, who was still standing at the door at a loss, was also stunned. In her eyes, Jiang Hai's naked appearance completely entered her sight. What's the matter? Seeing her gaze, Jiang Hai couldn't help but feel a little embarrassed. He immediately half closed the door, revealing only his head and half of his chest muscles. After hesitating for a while, he asked Ai Xiaoxi. No, nothing, I just want to ask, where is the water? Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Ai Xiaoxi was completely dumbfounded. Her mind turned and she made up a lie that she didn't believe herself. She stared at Jiang Hai and said blankly, Water? She was telling the truth. Indeed, the people of Wuxia were naturally hostile to the Japanese. Especially Jiang Hai, who was still in the northeast. His family didn't come from Guangdong but was born and raised in the northeast. He heard his grandfather say before that in fact, there was no one in the northeast who didn't hate the Japanese. Of course, in addition to the Japanese, they also hated the Russians. In the beginning, the Russians also did a lot of harm to the people of Wuxia. But later they were the big brother, so the higher-ups asked them to suppress the hatred. In Jiang Hai's generation, the hatred for the Russians gradually disappeared. However, under the propaganda of the imperial court, the hatred for the Japanese has never decreased. Although they hate the Japanese, they have to admit that the development of the Japanese industry is indeed a bit of a bug. The automobile industry, such a small place like Japan, can compete with the United States and Europe, and become the world's third largest automobile industry. Can be said that it is not strong. The light industry, needless to say, the world's three major camera brands, Canon, Nikon, Olympus, are all Japanese. In addition, the Japanese rice cooker is sold for more than 10,000 yuan in China, and there are people who buy it. The manufacturing of drugs and other light industries can indeed be ranked at the top of the world. Even if Jiang Hai doesn't want to admit it, the rice cooker in his family is also Japanese. After Ai Xiaoxi opened her mouth, she started to talk to Jiang Hai about the camera. Her words are not like what she said just now. She just likes to take selfies. It seems that she really likes to take photos. To be precise, she likes the camera. What long focal length, short focal length, continuous shooting, second shooting, and so on. She was talking, and Jiang Hai felt like he was listening to a heavenly book. Heaven and earth can testify that Jiang Hai is really not interested in this kind of thing. In the past, he was a loser. At one time, the most famous saying was, "Photography is poor for 3 generations, DSLRs are ruined for life." In the past, Jiang Hai didn't want to ruin his life, so he didn't play with this kind of thing. Now, when he hears these professional terms, it is like listening to a book. No matter what others think, Jiang Hai can't understand. Although Jiang Hai pretended that he is listening very seriously, the tears that are about to come out of his eyes prove that he is not listening. Seeing him like this, Ai Xiaoxi can't help but laugh. "You don't have to deliberately talk to me about things that interest me. I said that I was willing to do what I did last night. It's okay." Looking at Jiang Hai, Ai Xiaoxi lowered her head again and said lightly, "But." Hearing her words, Jiang Hai also knows that it is difficult for him to do anything for this girl, but this matter is a bit difficult to handle.